Right, welcome to Literature in English class once again. My name is Jesse Josh. Right, so we're going to go into another topic. Elements of poetry. Elements of poetry or features of poetry, like, whichever you'd like, elements or features of poetry. Now, before we go into the other main types of poetry, I'm going to tell you there are also features of poetry, right, or elements of poetry, but I'm starting it first so that you actually remember it, and I don't want to scatter it in between the types of poetry or the features of poetry that we're going to talk about. So I want to take it together, right, so that you get it and you don't forget it. It becomes easier to remember, right? So what I want to talk about is the types of the features of poems in lines, right? I hope you get what I mean. The features of poems in lines. So I mentioned when I was talking about the sonnets, right? I mentioned a couple of them, right? I said that a couplet is a two-line poem, a successive two-line poem, a successive two-line rhyming poem, right? So a couplet is a poem of two successive lines. Do you get the point? A couplet is a poem of two successive lines, which usually rhyme. Okay, so if you remember when we were talking about the sonnet, we mentioned how that Shakespearean sonnet was, it ended with a rhyming couplet. Right, we talked about the A, B, B, C, C, D, D, E, F, G, G, right? So G, G there is the rhyming couplet, and that's what a couplet is. Now, a couplet is usually used to project or suggest a solution to a problem or issue that must have been raised earlier in the previous lines or the previous stanzas of the poem. So it's basically like the resolution part of it. Right, it's basically like the resolution. It's like the end. You're putting every issue to rest. Okay, so that's basically what we are talking about. That's a couplet. Now, a couplet is a successive two-line poem that usually rhymes. Now, a tercet or a triplet is a successive rhyming three-line poem, or a poem of three successive rhyming lines. Right, so that is called a triplet or a tercet. A triplet or a tercet. Tercet is T-E-R-C-E-T, right? Now, a four-line poem or a poem of four successive rhyming lines is called a quatrain. A quatrain is a poem of four lines, successive rhyming lines. Four. Okay? A five-line or a quintet. Yes, a quintet or a quintain is a poem of five successive rhyming lines, right? A poem of five successive rhyming lines. So a five-line poem, usually successive, yes, of course, successive and rhyming is what? A five-line poem. A six-line poem is called a sestet. A sestet is called is a six-line poem. Now, basically, the only ones that rhyme or the one that is usually compulsory to rhyme is the couplet. A couplet is they both usually rhyme together. So you cannot see a couplet that is just that's a free verse, right? Remember what a free verse is, right? So you cannot see a couplet that is just a free verse. They most often than not rhyme together. So, but the other ones, the three lines, the four lines, the five lines, they may have a specific rhyme pattern, right? But they may not necessarily rhyme. Okay, so like for example, a four-line poem basically has about four possible ways it could rhyme: A-A-B-B, A-B-A-B, A-B-B-A, or A-A-A-A. Right. I could take that again: A-B-A-B, A-A-B-B, A-B-B-A, or A-A-A-A. That's basically all the possible combinations of a rhyme scheme that you can have in a quatrain, which is a four-line poem. So a five-line poem doesn't necessarily have a rhyme scheme. They might rhyme. Some of the lines might rhyme together. Maybe the first and second and the third, fourth, and the fifth might rhyme together. But necessarily, there's no specific rule for the quintet. Same thing for the sestet, which is a six-line poem, a six-line successive poem. It doesn't necessarily have to rhyme. Now, this a septet is a 7-line poem. A septet is a 7-line poem. A 7-line poem. A 7 successive line poem. Right? No compulsory rhyme scheme. An octave or an octet. Octet is OCTET. Octave or octet is an 8-line successive poem. It's an 8 successive line poem, right? So a poem of 8 lines is a what? Is an octave or an octet. Now, these are things you won't see in a regular textbook, right? It takes a lot of research to actually find them. Some teachers just know the common ones, which are couplet, triplets. Some people don't even know triplets or tercet. They think triplets is just for twins alone, or or triplets for children. I beg your pardon, maybe just for children alone. But no, you have triplets or tercet. We have your quatrain, right? We have your quintet, right? We have the sestet, we have the septet. Now we have the octave or the octet. Now, a 9-line poem, you might not have come across it anywhere, but a 9-line poem is also called a nonet. A nonet, right? So NONET is a 9 successive line poem, right? Now, some people call a nonet a Spenserian poem, right? Because a Spenserian poem usually has 9 lines. Right, in each of his stanzas, 9 lines, right? So you could either call it a nonet or a Spenserian poem. Now, for a 10-line poem, there are many, depending on the culture, right? Depending on where you are studying literature from, it differs, right? So a 10-line poem, I would go with a dizaine, right? Or a decaplet, right? It's a decaplet or a dizaine. Dizaine is a French word, right? So it comes from the French word dix. So the French word for 10 is dix. So we get dizaine from the French word. So dizaine is a 10-line poem or a decaplet or a decatet, right? Whichever works for you, you can, right? But the idea is decaplet, right? Now, there are no ones I've been able to figure out. There might be, but I've not been able to figure out for 11 and 12 and 13. But we know what a 14-line poem is, right? Yes, it's a 14-line poem is a sonnet, right? It's a sonnet. So I've been able to teach you the lines of poems, the amount of lines of poems and what they are called. So we'll take it from the top again. Remember, this is a part of the features of poetry. So we have the couplet, 2 lines. Triplet or tercet, 3 lines. Quatrain, 4 lines. Quintet or quintain, 5 lines. A sestet, 6 lines. Septet, 7 lines. Octave, 8 lines. A nonet, 9 lines. A decaplet or a dizaine is what? 10 lines. And we have a 14-line poem called a sonnet. All right, so I hope you've learned something. So please don't forget it.